Hello, my name is Alex Lavrov, I'm from IBM, and in this video we'll configure replication with IBM Change Data Capture from database to Azure Eventhub. We'll start with configuring command line utils like Kafka console consumer and producer and also Kafka cat in order to communicate with Azure Hub and see what data we are getting there, and then we'll continue to configuring IBM Change Data Capture and replicate some tables to there as well. Let's get started. Before we start deploying assets in Azure, let's get familiar with terminology. Eventhub is built on top of Kafka, so it supports Kafka API, but the names are a bit different. So as you can see, Kafka cluster on Azure called namespace, and topic is Eventhub. Partition is partition and consumer group is consumer group. So when CDC will start replicating, we'll replicate into Eventhub that are grouped in the same namespace, which is equivalent to Kafka cluster with several topics. So now let's go to Azure. Okay, so this is the dashboard of my Azure account. It's a free trial, but it should be enough to create namespace and several event hubs. So let's go to event hubs and create a new namespace, which is basically Kafka cluster. Let's call it resource group. We'll choose Alex text, and the namespace name, let's call it CDC test 1. Okay, and the pricing tier we need to choose standard, because only in standard and up the Kafka interface will be enabled. Basic is not enough for that, so we'll choose standard, review and create, and then we'll create the namespace. So now the deployment is in progress, and we'll be back when it will be finished. So the deployment is complete. Let's go to the resource. And now please see that Kafka surface enabled, meaning that Kafka API is available. Without it, we'll not be able to replicate. Let's go to event hubs and create a couple of them. We'll need two, one for the data, another one for commit stream. Commit stream is used for different tasks like TCC, transaction consistent consumer, things like that. We'll not be using that, but we need to create it anyway. So let's create the first event hub. We'll call it data topic. Data topic will remain on partition. Doesn't really matter for this demo. Let's create it. So the event hub data topic is being created. And the second one, we'll call it commit str for stream. Let's create it as well. So now we have two event hubs, so basically two topics, and the first step that we'll do is to configure different client utilities to work with event hubs. So we'll do it for Kafka cat and Kafka console consumer and producer. So first thing that we'll need to do is let's go back to the namespace. Okay, we see everything is working. And now we'll need to obtain shared access policy. Shared access policy is basically it's like a username and password. These are credentials that we'll be using in order to communicate with event hubs. There is shared access policy in each event hub, but since we'll have the single replication, replicating and using both of the topics, both of the event hubs, we'll need to use one on the namespace level. There is a default one, root manage shared access key. We will use it. Probably in the production environments it's not a good idea, but for the sake of this demo we'll use it. Let's give permission and save it. It's being updated. And what we'll need for this from this policy is this connection string primary key. Let's copy it to clipboard and put it in a notepad, so we'll use it in our configuration. So now let's go back to our server and start configuring the utilities. So the first utility we'll configure is Kafka cat. Kafka cat is a non-JVM, it's not written in Java, open source utility that I like to use in my demos and POCs very much because it's very flexible and very friendly, and it's both consumer and producer. In the previous videos I showed how to install and compile and configure it. So first we'll configure it, and we'll try to list the event hubs, meaning topics, that we have in our namespace. So the command to list the topics with Kafka cat will be Kafka cat -b for the broker, CDC test 1, the name of the namespace, the domain servicebuswindows.net, and the port 1993. This is how we communicate with it. And minus capital L is to list the topics. So if we'll execute it right now, of course it will fail because we didn't configure any SSL, no authentication, no nothing. So of course the broker transport failure error. In order to use Kafka-cat, we'll need to create configuration file and use it when we execute the command. So the template for such a file looks like this. We have the metadata broker list. Here we'll put the namespace. Security protocol, mechanism, and username are fixed. This we'll just copy paste it. And as password, we'll use the key that we copied from the dashboard. So let's do it. This is the key that we got from our Azure and service. Let's copy paste it here and let's put the namespace here. Okay, so now we'll copy it to our server. Let's create a file. Let's call it va kafka-cat cmg. Copy paste it and let's keep it. Now when we execute Kafka-cat, we'll need either to, with every command, specify this configuration file, or we can use environment variable Kafka-cat config in order to specify it as a default location. So let's create environment variable Kafka-cat config and point it cdc Kafka-cat cmg. So now when we execute this command again, it will pick up this configuration and hopefully it should work. Let's do it. Okay, so as you can see, it worked. It read configuration from this file and it showed that we have one broker, cdc test1 servicebuswindows.net, and two topics, data topic and commit str. So at this point the connectivity is set and we should be able to consume messages from these topics. Right now they're empty, but once we'll start replicate, we'll consume data from there. So the next step, we'll configure default Kafka command utilities like Kafka console producer and Kafka console consumer to use it, and configuration will be similar but a bit different. It will be closer to the configuration we have for CDC. So let's configure these two tools. Okay, so let's start configuration from Kafka console producer. The command to produce records into the topic will look like this. Kafka console producer -- bootstrap server and the name of the namespace with domain and port. This is the broker. And the topic is data topic from here. So, of course, if you'll execute it as is, it will not be able to connect and nothing will work. As you can see, it goes into the loop of retries. So let's cancel it. In order to use it, we'll need to create a similar configuration file that looks like this. Let's go to Kafka template. Okay, so here we have the bootstrap server. We'll put the namespace, security protocol, mechanism, and JS config, which in the password section will put the key that we got from Azure. So let's do it. Let's copy paste the key we got. Let's put it in instead of password and copy the namespace here. Let's copy paste the file and create a new file, vi producer properties. Let's copy paste it. And now when we are using, let's clear the screen. And now that we are going to use the Kafka console producer, we'll add the option that will point us to this configuration file, -- producer config and home cdc producer properties. Okay, so now if we'll execute it, we should be able to send messages to this Eventhub. Let's execute it. Okay, we got the prompt, so now let's send a couple of messages. Test1, test2, okay, and that's it. In order to use Kafka console consumer, we'll use the same file. It's a good idea to separate them in different files because maybe in the future we'll add some options that are only only accessible for producer or only for consumer. So even though the initial configuration is very similar, we'll create different files. So just copy producer properties to consumer properties. Okay, and now let's try to consume messages from this topic. We'll use Kafka console consumer with the same bootstrap server topic. We'll use -- consumer config. We'll use this file, and let's consume from beginning. $N. So now it connects. Okay, so it took some time because the server is probably far away, not on the same server, but you can see we consumed the same messages as we put with Kafka console producer. Great. So let's try the same with Kafka cat. So for Kafka cat, let's go back in history. Instead of -l, let's use -t data topic, and let's consume everything from beginning, which is a default behavior of Kafka cat. Let's do it. Okay, as you can see, we consumed the same messages. So now we have both utilities, both Kafka cat and default utilities from Kafka working. Now we are ready to configure IBM change data capture in order to replicate data to data topic, and then we'll use one of these utilities to consume and see that we actually got the messages where we wanted them. To configure IBM change data capture instance to work with Eventhubs, we'll need to do 4 things. First is to create a JS configuration file, that is Java Authentication and Authorization Service configuration file that will contain the key that we got from our Azure portal. Second one, specify it in the Java properties when the instance is started. Then modify Kafka producer properties file and Kafka consumer properties file with similar options that we had in Kafka command utilities. So let's start with JS configuration file. The JS configuration file content should follow the following template. So we have Kafka client, and then we have a very similar to the previous configurations string. One of them is password that we'll need to put the endpoint configuration that we got from the portal. So let's do it. Let's copy paste the same string we had earlier right here. Okay, now let's copy it and go to configuration directory of the instance. It will be in OPP IBM CDC instance, and there I created the new instance that we'll use for Eventhub's replication, Eventhubs, and inside we have configuration directory. We will not use the general configuration directory because we don't want it to affect all instances that we're going to create, just this specific instance. So let's create this file, pi.jas.conf, and copy paste the content here. Let's save it. Next, we'll specify the argument in dmts64 VM args file that will be used as argument file for the JVM. Let's do it. vi dmts64 VM args. It's a new file, it doesn't exist by default. Let's copy paste. So this is the argument we'll use, Java security authentication login config, and then the full path to our JS conf file. Next, we'll configure 2 additional files, Kafka consumer properties and Kafka producer properties. To configure these files, we'll use the previous configuration we used for Kafka command line utilities, and let's take a look. So this is the previous template we used, the bootstrap servers, protocol, and mechanism. We will not use JS config line because we have it already specified in JVM arguments. So let's put our namespace in place, copy first 2 lines, and now we'll modify the files Kafka producer properties. Let's paste it at the end, and Kafka consumer properties also will go to the end. So now after we modified everything, we are ready to start the instance. So let's start it. No-hub opt IBM CDC bin dmts64 -a event hubs. This is our new instance. And now we are ready to create first subscription and see if it works with Azure Event Hubs. Let's create a subscription. We'll call it to Azure. Source test DB, target Event Hubs. Let's map tables. We'll use the same table as we used before from auto insurance schema, vehicle types. And now we'll configure Kafka properties. Kafka properties will specify zookeeper. We will not use schema registry because we are going to use user exit that will replicate in plain JSON, but also will map everything to data topic because we don't want to use the default topics that CDC will try to create. Data topic, this is the parameter of the user exit. I don't want to refresh, we'll just replicate the changes. And let's start the replication. Now we'll go to the server and start replicate some data. Here I have two windows opened. One window is connected to the source database, where we perform the changes to the database. And second window here is where we listen to the Event Hub that we'll be replicating to. So first of all, let's connect to the Event Hub and start consuming messages. We are consuming from the end because we don't want to see all the tests we did before. So let's start Kafka cat. Okay, so now it's listening to the messages. And now we'll perform insert into the table, vehicle types, as you can see here. Insert into auto insurance vehicle types, values, type V20, convertible small. Let's perform the change. It auto-committed, and now we'll see the change coming from Azure Event Hub, as you can see here. Let's perform another one, type 21, huge, okay. And now, as you can see, we got it from Event Hub. So now we see that CDC successfully replicated data to Event Hub, data topic, and we consume it using Kafka cat. All configurations and templates for these configurations will be documented in GitHub repository, and the link to this repository will appear in the description of this video. Thank you for watching.